welcome everyone to the Together Short Lives, Together We Learn webinar series. It's lovely to see so many of you here. Today we have the team from HERD, and I will allow them to introduce themselves. So the plan is that they will do a presentation, and they'll ask for questions at various times during that presentation, and please join in as much as you want to. Please, if you have a question, raise your hand or put it in the chat, and we will come to you with your question. But ideally wait until those times that you're asked so that the team can do their presentation. But lovely to see you all. And as just for those who've just joined us, I am recording the session so that we can make it available to people who can't be here. So I will hand over to Tara now, who will introduce herself and the rest of the team and start. Thank you.
Thanks, Jo. Good morning, everyone. I realise that my lighting's a bit funny and I look like I'm, I don't know, presenting from the middle of the sun or something. I don't know why that's happening, but it's nice to be here. I just quickly introduce those of us that are presenting today. My name's Tara Elliott and I'm a children's palliative care nurse by background. I'm working as a director of care in a children's hospice. But for the last year, I've been doing some independent consultancy work with HERD. I have with me my colleague, Tracy Rennie, who is also a children's nurse by background and has a wealth of experience in children's palliative care. And we are also joined by Amy, who is the programme manager from HERD. It would be lovely if you could put your introduce yourselves in the chat with your name and role, and just where you're coming from. That would be great. And Amy, would you like to start sharing the slides for me, please? So I'm going to take you through the first half of this presentation, and then we'll have a time for questions and comments, and then Tracy will do the second part. So I'm going to have to say next slide, next slide, please, Amy. And I think actually you can go through the next one because the second slide is just asking you to put your introductions in the chat. So by way of introduction, and I know there might be people on here who are hearing this presentation for the first time and people here who have heard it before. And also just recognising that I think there are probably people here whose main role is working within palliative or hospice care, and others who may be involved in palliative care, but that might not be the main thing that you do. HERD is a media charity that exists to change perceptions, primarily within the public, of poorly understood issues. So Amy works for HERD, Tracy and I don't work for HERD, but we do consultancy with HERD. So some of the projects that they are working on at the moment are changing perceptions around poverty, climate change and migration. And children's palliative care, the Children's Palliative Care Project as part of HERD has been going now about 5 or 6 years. It's funded by True Colours Trust, and initially was aimed to change public perceptions of children's palliative care following a run of high-profile cases such as Charlie Gard and Alfie Evans. And I was one of the specialist advisors right from the beginning, who, when we started to understand the way that HERD work and the aims of the project, said immediately this needs to be much broader, because it's not just a problem within the public setting that in terms of misunderstandings of what children's palliative care is. Actually, that really extends into the professional setting as well. And so the project immediately went from just starting to think about public perceptions through all the way through to people, specialists working with children who might benefit from palliative care. Thanks, Amy. So we will come back to this at the end as well, when we think about maybe ways that we might be able to practically support you in your roles. But just to start with, some of the resources that we've produced together over the last few years. We produced a toolkit to help people to talk about children's palliative care, and you can see on the right this kind of guide to thinking about how we might reframe content. We know that children's palliative care and children's hospices really have had a PR problem for quite a long time, with people jumping to conclusions about what they are. And a lot of what the tips and guidance that we might get you to think about today is kind of what you're doing already, but it's just about maybe thinking about doing things in a different way, maybe slightly changing wording, and just maybe just having a different focus on the way that we talk about palliative care. I know for me, I've done palliative care for kind of nearly 20 years when I started working with HERD. And although that had been my specialist area, immediately I wanted to just tweak things, change the way that I maybe introduce palliative care, or talk about hospices. Thanks, Amy. So what we're going to do, I'm going to talk you through a bit of the communication science and the narrative change framework and principles that HERD use to change perceptions about any of their misunderstood topics. And then Tracy will give you some specific examples from children's palliative care. And then at the end, we will get you to come back to this and think about how we might support you. So we're fully funded by True Colours, how we might support you in your roles or teams or organisations. But some of the ways that we've done that is helping to give feedback on communication resources. So whether that's family information leaflets, websites, also by bringing teams and organisations together. So we'll come on to this a bit later, but how important it is to get consistency right within messaging. So for example, within hospices, getting the fundraising team, the clinical team, education team, comms team, whoever it is, all together so that that messaging is consistent. And just as also a way of kind of signposting and sharing resources. Thanks, Amy. So what we're focusing on today, as I said, I'm going to share the communication science and framing insights that can help us to reframe the way we talk about children's palliative care. But really the important thing is the reason why we want to do this, the reason why we think this is important, is because it will improve equity and access to children's palliative care. Thank you. Okay, so when we talk about framing, like I said, it's being really intentional about the way that we present information. So it might be that we don't need to change a lot from what we currently do, but it's thinking about what we say when we're talking about palliative care, how we say it, and when we say it. And we will give more examples as we go through. Thanks, Amy. So we're going to go through some principles of reframing. Before we do that, it's helpful to understand why people might think the way they do about palliative care and then act the way they do. Thanks, Amy. So first of all, we tend to think fast, and there's loads of reasons for this. I've just been chatting to a friend this morning, and we were just talking about how overloaded our brains are with everything that's going on at the moment. And so actually it's easy for us to jump to conclusions. It's easier for us to maybe reinforce things that we might already think about a topic. If someone talks about it, it's just easier for us to jump to that conclusion rather than actually challenge that and think more deeply about that. And there's this other quote: humans cannot spend a moment of their waking life without making inferences. So we spend hours or even days just kind of making assumptions, jumping to conclusions, and without ever really challenging that or engaging in real reasoning. And the other part of that, thanks, Amy, is that we like to think in story. And so the way our brain works is that actually we turn all this bombardment of like different confusing and random information, our brain turns it into a story that we're going to be able to understand. And that's why when we come on to talking about children's palliative care, I think this is really crucial in actually, I am an educator by background, and for a long time, if we thought that actually there were issues in misunderstanding children's palliative care, we would kind of think about education. And education, of course, is helpful, But what we do when we talk about children's palliative care in an education setting, it tends to be a definition. And actually people can learn the definition and repeat the definition, and that's kind of going on okay in your head. But actually, when we're thinking about changing perceptions, we're thinking about changing an emotional reaction. And that's where talking in story can be really helpful. So at the beginning of this project, really, that initially with, as I said, aimed at the public, True Colours commissioned some work with a market research company to find out what normal people in the public think about children's palliative care. So we've got a video next to show you. And oh, no, sorry, we've got a video in a minute. So before we go on to the video, the next principle in reframing is so we understand why people think and act the way they do. And secondly, if we want to talk about that topic differently, try to think how they might interpret your message. And so now we'll look at the video to hear what members of the public described their kind of feelings and responses to what children's palliative care is.
Children's palliative care, what does it mean to me? Basically, it's heartbreaking, absolutely heartbreaking, because you know at the end the child's going to die.
A child is terminally ill and doesn't necessarily have any other options left other than to make things the most comfortable as possible that you probably can.
Just overridingly sad. It's just a very, very terrible part of life and just a fact of life, unfortunately, but there's very little positive to come out of palliative care other than the sense that I guess you're trying to make someone as comfortable as they can possibly be in the worst moment of their life.
When I first hear the phrase palliative care, it makes me feel sad.
Thanks, Amy. So again, it's not to say any of those things aren't true. It is sad when children die, but if you hit the message there was overwhelmingly awful, no options, terrible, little positive to come out of children's palliative care. And those of you who are working with children who have palliative care needs, just think for a moment how their families might describe the way that they live. And there will be moments of sadness and there will be moments where it feels overwhelming. But generally speaking, families talk about their children, their likes, their interests. That's generally not how people describe their lives day to day. So where do there's a disconnect, right? So where do these stories come from? So they come from all over the place. And sometimes they come from us as well. So yes, initially I said that the project was funded as a way of trying to counterbalance the high profile cases that were in the media. But actually it could be through fundraising. It could be one of the adverts in my local area at the moment has been holding your hand through the unimaginable. It might be something like the adverts we've got ahead in front of us. So really focusing on the tragedy and trying to kind of provoke that emotional reaction, you know, that it's all overwhelmingly either sad or focused on conflict. So really those stories can come from anywhere. And I always think, since I've been involved in this, like I said, how do I contribute to that? So for me, one of the things I often reflect on is when I'm in a social situation and somebody says, oh, what do you do? And I normally start with, I'm a nurse. And then, you know, if I'm pushed, children's nurse. And then if I'm really pushed, children's palliative care. And then the whole, you know, you will all know the reaction of, oh, that's so sad. And I never really knew how to respond to that and how I might be kind of either confirming or maybe challenging some of these. I have an opportunity to challenge some of these perceptions. The next slide, thanks Amy, is really, really important. Why are we here today? Why are we telling you all of this? Why are we doing any of this? And it's because of the impact these perceptions have on children and families. One of the, I think it was in the previous slide, there was an article, one of Lorna Fraser's articles about looking at barriers within the evidence, within literature, about barriers to children's palliative care. And consistently throughout all of those studies, one of the things is, well, people's misunderstanding, and that might be the referrer, it might be the lead clinician, it might be the family. The impact, if people think that children's palliative care and children's hospice care are all the things that we heard in that video, overwhelmingly awful, very little positive, just terrible, only something you do when there's no options. Of course, families aren't going to want to access that because it's just not appealing. So families might delay seeking care, or they might be referred too late. But also for professionals working in other teams, that can produce real tension, because if that's what they believe as well, then actually that's hard for them to hand children over, which is often why, not that we would want to hand children over, but to work alongside palliative care teams, which is often why families and children are referred so late, because when they're, at the point when a child is actually dying. And also from a public perspective, it means that if you think about the reactions of the people you just heard on the video, people don't really want to engage in it because it becomes so unbearable. You almost want to turn away, and at best you might get people giving money because it might make them feel a bit better, but really not wanting to engage in this in terms of advocacy for better funded services and kind of within policy development as well. Thanks, Amy. So the third point here is to, if we understand why people think the way they do, anticipate how they might interpret the message that we're giving, and then to find ways to avoid triggering that quick, automatic jumping to conclusions type of thinking. And I'm going to just give you some examples from the reframing science, and then Tracy will apply that to children's palliative care. So thanks, Amy. The first one is to lead with the truth and avoid myth busting, essentially. So I used to be someone who would often say, when I was introducing children's palliative care, oh, you might think that children's palliative care is just like adult palliative care. You might think that children's palliative care is all about death and dying, and it's not. But what we know is that actually there's a real risk when we try to bust a myth, because our brains are so busy and like to take the easy way out. What you risk doing is, oh, I've just heard children's palliative care and I've heard death and dying, so she's telling me that children's palliative care is about death and dying. And this example here was a campaign that seriously backfired, trying to bust myths around the flu vaccine. So you can see it's got the myth and then it's got the fact. And what happened was people believed the myths because the flu isn't a serious disease. And you can kind of see why, because actually you're just going to read the top one. But not only did the myth busting backfire, the people who believed that the flu vaccine was all of those things, all of those myths, actually attributed it to the people giving the information. So if I say the MMR vaccine doesn't cause autism, your brain hears MMR vaccine, autism, and then they're going to go, oh, that nurse Tara told me that. I mean, obviously it's not, this doesn't always happen, but there is evidence to say that there's a real risk that when we myth bust, we reinforce that belief. So rather than saying what it's not, we just want to tell the truth. Children's palliative care is, and Tracy will give you some examples. And the next one is and the other way is to use metaphors. And so this is one that we really like in HERD, which is kind of the idea of palliative care as an umbrella. So actually, we're going to give you the umbrella in time. So an early palliative care referral isn't saying that it's definitely going to rain on you. It's saying we're going to give you something in case that happens. It's the just in case, rather than those of you particularly who might have worked or working in hospices, I'm sure will have heard parents who come either for end of life care or for post-death support, bereavement support, who didn't access the hospice before, and know how heartbreaking it is for that when that family says, oh wow, just wish we'd come earlier. He or she would have loved that. So And the reason why we want to think about metaphors goes back to one of the slides a bit earlier, when I said actually our brains like to use stories to help us to understand things. So this for me is the difference between education, where you can get people to say palliative care is and list off a definition, but actually it might not change the fact that they refer families to you. Whereas actually if we start to talk in stories, we might change the gut reaction, which might be the thing that stops people from referring. So you might just want to think about metaphors that either you use or you've heard used, and often families use them. And we did some teaching, I think it was back in the spring, and someone shared that actually a family talked about palliative care for their child, and said that actually their child's life was like a book, and they didn't know how many pages would be in the book. They didn't know how long the book would be. But what palliative care and support from the hospice helped them do was to make sure every page was as full as possible. And, you know, I often talk about palliative care being something that helps children to live as well as possible for as long as possible. And it's that idea, I love it, that's kind of the metaphor for that is that book, and making sure that every page, no matter how many pages there are, is really full. Thanks, Amy. And the third word, so finding ways to avoid triggering automatic thinking. Sometimes it's also about the way and the order in which we give people information. So we've said that leading with the story that we want to tell, not starting with myths, and using images or metaphors or just telling stories, and to tell a story with data, not about data. So someone else in our team often talks about it being like different recipes, that you might put the ingredients in, but the way that you put the ingredients in and the order that you put the ingredients in and what you do with the ingredients might make a difference between, oh my goodness, I've forgotten it now, what is it, bread and something else. You can tell I'm not a cook, but you know how just saying the same things but in a slightly different way, ordered in a different way with a different focus, can produce a very different kind of outcome and understanding. Thanks, Amy. The next one. And so all of this is pretty, I mean, it's principle number 4, but it's pretty much kind of the focus of all of this. It's about being intentional in the way that we communicate, so that we're encouraging people to be more curious and more open, and I guess more open-minded to thinking about what children's palliative care is, what hospice care is. And Amy, I think, could you stop sharing the slides now? Thank you.
I've been in the sector 30 years now. I was a director of care and deputy chief exec at East Anglia's Children's Hospices for over 25 years, and I was introduced to the herd work a couple of years before I stood back from my substantive role. And I was a bit arrogant, to be quite honest. I went in thinking I know how to talk about children's palliative care. I'd done it for years, and herd's not a clinical organisation. What can they teach me? And I had so many light bulb moments, because actually as a clinician, certainly I wasn't encouraged to think about what's the science behind it. I was told how to talk about palliative care to a degree, and it was just the simple things like telling the stories. I was the biggest myth buster on the planet, and I also always used to lead with the most destructive, tragedy-laden conversations. If I think about some of the fundraising events and those poor people that I talked to, not thinking about, I was always talking about the unimaginable and imagine if, not necessarily thinking about that people in that audience could be the future families that we're going to be caring for, the future grandparents, parents, brothers, sisters. And actually, and again, it's like Tara was saying, it was about tweaking, just thinking slightly differently, and just being a bit more mindful about the language that we use. So as Tara's beautifully summarised, we're automatic thinkers. We jump to conclusions based on what we already know. So what are the news stories that we can tell that helps us change these perceptions? And part of that research that True Colours commissioned in the first place was go back to that group of people, those participants, and try different stories, different approaches. And then they pulled all of that together, they consolidated it into these 3 key principles, and a principle around talking about death that I'm just going to share with you now. What I would say is if we did a longer session and we were doing it in person, we'd give you more examples, but we're mindful we're a bit time constrained today.
So the first one, and I will also say, it's not rocket science, guys, and it's very easily applicable. So the first one is showing children's palliative care at its best. You can see here, there's a wonderful quote from Finn, who many of you may know, who's a children's palliative care consultant that works at Great Ormond Street. And she talks about palliative care, about living the life you can and live it for as long as you're able to. And I think that's really important for us to focus on. And we know that the automatic assumption is children's palliative care, children's hospices, it's all about death and dying. It's actually about living. And we need to lead with the examples that show it's about this all-encompassing care, that it's for the whole family, that it's lifelong, and it's the focus on living as well as possible. And we know most of the families that we work with and we care for, this will be their first time. So they're thinking about what they've heard in the media, what they've heard in the latest soap opera line, what they've read in the newspaper, what they've seen in the news. And actually, we've got to help them to think differently about that. And for some of the professionals that we work with, if palliative care is not the thing you do day in and day out, you may be faced with that in your role quite infrequently. You might be a commissioner that's trying to think about, how do I put a strategy or a bid document together so I know it's going to land well with the people that I'm trying to influence? And all of these principles apply. So you can see here, if we start talking about what children's palliative care at its best and bring it to life with lots of examples, real life examples from ourselves and from families, we can really help families, people to see the value of these services and move away from the feelings of fatalism. Thanks, Amy. So the second one, and this was another light bulb moment for me, we need to talk in ways that show how the children we care for get to be children. I've never even thought about that. I just assumed people knew that, but they don't. And I think back to my time at Each when I talked about children going to school, and the donor said to me, "What do you mean children go to school?" They didn't think children did or should because they were too unwell. They didn't see the child as a child. So it's up to us to show how our children have the same as any other child. They've got the same needs for fun, friendship, play, education, and those all important family experiences. And we show how children aren't fundamentally different through the stories that we tell. I think also that's really important to consider, particularly if you're creating content where you're trying to create funds, etc. Talk about the child as a person first. So often we see a child described, this is Billy, who's 3 years old with. These are the challenges they face. What we don't do as professionals often is say, this is Billy, who really enjoys going swimming, watching the football with his dad, playing games, all of those sorts of things. And if we listen to a family and they talk about the child, the first thing they always do is tell you about their child as a person. And if we ask the family, tell me about Billy, they wouldn't say, oh, immediately, oh, he's such and such with all of these challenges. They would tell you about the things that is wonderful about their child and then go on to talk about those challenges. And you can see here a couple of examples which we from organisations that we've worked with where there's some really good content out there. So if anybody's struggling, we're here to help. There is actually an awful lot of content, really good content out in the media really well. Emma, I've seen your note there. Equally, it would be great sorry, it's Amy's note. It'd be great to catch up with you at some point about the work that you're doing. If we can move on to slide 3, please. So really, really critical. And for me, over the last 2 years that I've nearly 3 years, crikey, that I've been working with HEARD, this is becoming more and more important. We need to talk about the teams and the people in the teams that come together at different times that makes for great care. And it really helps to counter those high profile media stories where teams are pitted against each other or doctors are pitted against healthcare teams. And it's so important that we do that. And we've also heard from professionals who get really cross with the hospice sector when the hospice sector present themselves as the only ones doing something. So, if you don't get referred to a hospice, your child may die alone. So, facing the death of a child alone. We're trying to do it with the best of intentions, but actually unintentionally, we're creating diversity and a tension between the very people that we really proud to work with day in and day out. So if we can focus on those great relationships and all how teams come together at different times, it really, again, helps to build this public understanding. And remember, again, the families, it's often their first time. There are some families, of course, that it won't be their first time, but most it will, and they won't recognise or understand how everybody works together. And Tara made an important point earlier, showing how we work alongside and in addition. And again, that's a huge cultural shift from where we were 25 years ago. As hospices and palliative care people, we were trying to encourage people to refer at end of life. So we created a narrative around end of life. Now we're changing the goalposts quite significantly, and we're saying we're here right from the beginning. We're here. We can be alongside, and we need to help our professionals to understand that, so that they can then talk that through with the families. Was listening to again, thinking back, we had a session with some parents a couple of weeks ago, and one of the parents actually described Finn, as it happened to be Finn, the consultant, who changed her life, because Finn was the first doctor that had an honest conversation with her, which then resulted in her accepting hospice care. And her big regret after her child died was, if she'd known earlier all the other memories that she could have created, all the great experiences her son would have. And none of us ever would intend to disadvantage families by the way that we talk about the very thing that we do day in and day out. Okay, next slide, please. So equally, talking about this, we talked a lot about focusing on living and the positive stories, but of course we must and should always talk about death, dying and bereavement. It's a vital aspect of the care that we give, and for some families, it will be the first thing that we need to talk about the family about. So maybe in the neonatal period, or a sudden diagnosis where death is very soon, it's important that we talk about it. But these same three principles apply, and importantly, we highlight what goes unseen. So again, there's some beautiful stories when families talk about their experiences of end-of-life care, how we made a difference, whether it's a specialist palliative care team in a hospital, a community team, a hospice team, a hospital team, charities that are working with families. But it's the little things often that make a difference. Again, I remember a mum talking to us about her experience when she moved from the paediatric intensive care unit to one of the hospices that I was working with at the time, and she talked about the little thing that made a difference was her child's name on the door. His favourite teddy was in the bed waiting for him. The things that you do day in and day out, you don't even think about, but actually for those people that aren't familiar, they've got no idea. So if we don't tell them what happens, they make up those stories about what they think it's going to be like. So again, it's the what, the how and the when matters. Always talk about how we could help support and tell those real life stories. And there are, again, we haven't got time to show you them all now, but there's some really lovely examples of content, both from the NHS and from the hospice sector, about how the family's experience of death and how you can then talk about death, dying and bereavement. Okay, next slide, please. So here's just one example that we've used. I say we have got lots, and we can see here, so the dad talking about his babe. It sounds strange for me, but the last day was actually my favourite day with Ty, because we got to cuddle him and spend time with him without all of the tubes and machines. I feel so grateful that we got to have those cuddles and say goodbye, and the staff didn't rush us at all. We both felt, and you see their mum, we both felt, sorry, Hannah, who was a mum, we both felt very supported by the staff. They took the time to explain what was going on, answer the questions. We'll be forever grateful. Now, this is them talking about death, but they're also talking about great palliative care. They're also talking about helping their baby to be a baby and be cuddled, have time with him, all of those sorts of things. There's a beautiful, it's an NHS video around trisomy 18. And there's a wonderful extracted video of a little boy singing nursery rhymes to his baby. It was just a wonderful experience. But again, if we don't tell those stories, people don't know. Okay, next slide, please. I'm mindful, obviously there won't be, maybe not fundraisers on the call, I'm not sure. But if those of you are working in organisations where it's really critical that you are trying to raise the funds to keep your service going, historically, there's been a huge focus on telling the tragic death and dying story, make people cry and they give. That does work, absolutely works. The downside of that is it just goes to reinforce the misperceptions and actually alienates the very people we're trying to support. But what we're able to start demonstrating now is, and it's becoming more apparent across the sector, if we talk about storytelling in a much more principled way, much more framed way, we can still deliver tangible fundraising results. And we've got an example here from Each and Haven House, who have given us permission to share this. So Each, we worked with Each a couple of years ago now, after I left, I might add. I looked at the original messaging I helped put together while I was there and was hugely embarrassed. But we then worked with the comms team, and this is the end of their second year now, and you can see that they've had an exceptional year in their fundraising. Their annual accounts are out now if anybody wants to have a look. It's possible they're bucking the trend. It's not only about the way they frame their messages, it's also clearly about the way the teams work together. But you can see that, if I remember rightly, they've got a surplus of over £1 million this year, at a time when most hospices are struggling. So there is something they are doing well there. And they, again, they're very open to talk about the way that they work. And you can see Haven House here did this most incredible video, Through My Eyes. It was the story of a child through their brother's eyes, and they had it for a major fundraising event, and you can see that it raised 190,000 on the night. They took a risk. They used the framing principles to put the film together. They were brave, and if you can see there, the return of investment was over 2,000. They were absolutely in raptures about it. So it does work for the people that need to support us and bring in the funds so that we can continue to deliver the care that we need to deliver. Okay, Amy. So finally, and all the way through this, Tara has been reinforcing, and we need to keep reinforcing, we're all in this together. This isn't a herd project. This is a sector responsibility. All of us have a responsibility to think about how we can talk about children's palliative care, support other people that are maybe struggling or have got less confidence. And the only way we can change perceptions over time is consistently reinforcing those messages. Next slide, please, Amy. So you can see here that the moment the narrative feels a little bit, there's arrows all over the place. And actually what we need to do is move those arrows so we're all going in the same direction. What we're not saying is everybody has to use exactly the same words all of the time, because gosh, that would be boring. But it's the principles, so we can all tell our own unique stories and help families to tell their own unique stories. Thanks, Amy. So you saw the video at the beginning where we went out to the participants who were drawn from the public to say, tell us what you think when you hear children's palliative care. So we brought that group of people were brought back together, and then they were then explained children's palliative care using the different stories and the narrative and the principles that we've gone through. So just look at the difference that it makes.
I think I would describe it as children's palliative care is always tailored to a specific child, and it's always more than we expect. It's always more than just medical care, and there's different levels of care.
It isn't all about sadness, that there is this side to it where they give children experiences where them and their families, and they get this amazing support that isn't appreciated, and the child is at the center, is at the center of everything.
The superhero, I really like that. Yeah, it's definitely where the superheroes work, and it's where families and the children can live each day to the fullest, with the exceptional care and support required for all the members of family.
Palliative care, like I said, it still just sounds like death.
How would you describe it?
It's care beyond your wildest dreams. It encompasses everything. It encompasses looking after your child, looking after your family, looking after your siblings, providing choices, providing excitement, providing activity, providing care, providing respite. And and if you're going to start telling people about them, give them a link, let them have a look at it so they can see for themselves the amazing work that palliative care teams do.
So you can see there, guys, on the whole, that the people there, they had a different tone, a different demeanour. We purposely left Vicky in there because you can see her immediate response was, yeah, but it still just sounds like death. And we will have that response. But what's important, when it was, can you now describe it? Then you saw how she talked about it, what it was in its entirety, all encompassing about the whole family. And for professionals, and again, when you talk to parents, they will still say, once people talk to me about it and I got it. But my first thought, of course, was it's about death, it's about dying and sadness, because that's what the current misperception is. So, Amy, can you just click again? I'll just have both of the bits up together. So you'll see here, grateful thanks to Sarah Barnforth, who's a midwife at Forget Me Not Hospice. She approached us and asked if we could help her with one of the leaflets she was putting together around their antenatal support that they offer with the local neonatal unit. And you'll see here there's the before and after. So the before's top left. I appreciate the text is really quite small, but the things I wanted to point out here was it was great working with Sarah. She had so many light bulb moments, and we talked through the principles. She went away and almost reframed it all by herself. She just did a wonderful job. But I think the key points here is the bottom right is far more personalised. It reaches out to the people that actually are looking are experiencing a very difficult time, and show how the support that can be on offer is so much all encompassing. So for example, you can see what support is offered on the top left. There's 4 bullet points, and then what we offer comes first on the left in the main leaflet, and then it talks about emotional practical support with care. It uses language like gentle conversations about hopes and wishes. So you can see how just some tweaks to what was there, moving things around, really makes all the difference. And again, it was great working with Sarah. We've got lots of examples again that we can share with people if people are working on different projects. And we do keep saying it is fully funded. The support that we offer you, you don't have to pay for it. And we appreciate how important that could be at this time for people, because it's very, the sector is really strapped across all parts of it. Giving feedback on resources and strategies, so like family leaflets. We've given feedback on application packs, job adverts, a strategy document for an ICB, an all-age strategy. Interestingly, they started with adults and put children on the end, so we've reframed that and removed the language that said there is nothing more unimaginable than the death of a child, and it focused only on end-of-life care. So real practical stuff, moving stuff around. Again, bringing the teams and organisations together. If there's anyone from hospices, if you're not sure that we've been to you yet, get in touch. And we've had some really wonderful interactions where organisations come together, and the synergy between clinical teams, fundraising teams, HR teams, retail teams, recognising you're all trying to tell the same story and you've got a wealth of stories to tell. The resources, these slides will be shared with you afterwards, and there's links to the website so that you can download everything that we talk about, and it's free to use. Just use it widely, share it with your colleagues. Equally, what I didn't say was we've also helped frame research proposals. We're doing an academic article at the moment. We've helped people frame their education programmes or think about how you might include this in education programmes. For example, a couple of slides when you're introducing children's palliative care, the importance of framing it well. We can help you with that. And then the two on the right hand side are more network approach. So the spokesperson network is there for anyone that is working to develop content. Emma, that might be something for you to think about. And that's a mix of professionals and parents. It's largely NHS and charities because they create the most content, but we do have links with NHS colleagues too for there. And the narrative Change Hub, again, is for people that are delivering and developing content all the time. And again, that tends to be more hospice focused and charitable focused, but it's there for anyone that's working on content. So again, if you're in an NHS team that is delivering comms around palliative care, etc., there's a hub there that we can connect you with.